Welcome back to the channel. Today we will step far back into the mists of time. Imagine, if you will, that we're all sitting together in an ancient sun-baked courtyard, gathering around to study humanity's absolutely oldest, most enduring memory. We're talking about the story of a world completely consumed by water, a massive ark, animals rescued two by two, a catastrophic deluge that wipes out literally almost all life on Earth. Now, whether you're a historian, a scientist, or a person of faith, this story is just completely ingrained in our collective consciousness. So today, in this explainer, we're going to examine the ancient texts, the Earth itself, and the historical artifacts to figure out exactly where this incredible story actually comes from.
So, is the world's most famous story history, or is it a symbol? I want you to ask yourselves, did Noah's flood actually happen exactly as it was written down? For billions of people around the globe, this narrative is an absolute cornerstone of their faith. But you know, for centuries, skeptics, historians, and scientists have wrestled with this exact same question. Are we looking at a literal historical record of a complete planetary reset? Or are we reading a profoundly symbolic story that was inspired by genuine, terrifying, real-world events? To really find out, we've got to weigh faith, history, and scientific evidence with a totally open mind.
Section 1. The Dual Traditions.
Okay, let's dive into this by actually examining the texts themselves, because we really can't understand the flood without looking at the dual traditions that have carried this story across millennia. Our primary text here is the book of Genesis, and notice the specific sequence of events. First, humanity becomes corrupt and violent, which prompts divine judgment. But one righteous man, Noah, is chosen to survive. He's instructed to build an enormous ark, which is just a monumental task, to rescue his family and representatives of every animal species. Then comes the sheer devastation. Rain falls for 40 days and 40 nights, covering even the very highest mountains. Finally, the waters recede, and the ark comes to rest on the mountains of Ararat. And you know, for many, many centuries, most people accepted this terrifying narrative as literal, unvarnished history. To them, it was the absolute truth of how our world was shaped.
And this brilliantly illustrates that the biblical account absolutely does not exist in isolation. On the left side here, we have Noah. But long before the book of Genesis was even written, civilizations in Mesopotamia were telling some remarkably similar stories. Over on the right, we've got Utnapishtim from the ancient Epic of Gilgamesh. Just look at these striking parallels. Utnapishtim is also warned of a coming deluge. He also builds a giant boat. He saves animals to preserve life. And afterward, he releases birds to search for dry land. Sounds pretty familiar, right? Historians recognize these deep, undeniable connections between the biblical text and those much older Mesopotamian traditions. The echoes across these ancient cultures are just impossible to ignore.
Section 2. The Geological Reality. Now, as students of history, we also have to be students of the Earth. Let's close our ancient scrolls for just a second and look at the physical world. If a flood covered the highest mountains, we have to ask an incredibly simple practical question: where in the world did all that water come from? When modern geology first emerged, scientists started testing this literal global deluge claim against physical evidence. The claim, of course, states that floodwaters covered even the highest peaks. But the geological reality? Modern science tells us that even if every single glacier and ice sheet on Earth melted entirely, the whole shebang, there simply isn't enough water on the planet to submerge mountains like Everest. Furthermore, if we look at the rock record, which is essentially the memory of the Earth itself, geologists find absolutely zero evidence in those layers for a recent worldwide flood covering the entire globe. Because of this massive difference in scale between those literal claims and Earth's actual geological data, most modern scientists do reject the idea of a literal global flood.
Section 3. The Seed of Truth. But hey, we shouldn't just dismiss the story entirely. If geology rejects a global planetary flood, why do these exact same stories persist across so many different ancient cultures? Well, the myth might actually be rooted in a devastating, localized catastrophe. And that brings us to one of the most fascinating theories in modern archaeology, the Black Sea Flood hypothesis. Proposed by researchers William Ryan and Walter Pittman, this theory suggests that a massive, super rapid flooding of the Black Sea Basin happened around 7,500 years ago. Now, as your careful teacher today, I do have to remind you to keep a balanced view here. While this hypothesis is incredibly intriguing and offers a really compelling origin for the flood myth, it's not universally accepted by all scientists. Some argue the flooding was much smaller, or that there just isn't quite enough evidence to connect it directly to Noah. Still, the mechanics of this proposed disaster are absolutely captivating.
Let's move to and see how this builds step by step. First, the last ice age ends. As a direct result in step 2, global sea levels begin to rise dramatically due to all those melting ice sheets. Step 3 is the breaking point.
The rising Mediterranean waters actually break right through a natural land barrier. Then, in step 4, an unfathomable volume of seawater rushes into the Black Sea basin, which, at the time, might have just been a much smaller freshwater lake. Finally, step 5, entire communities living along those ancient shores are violently displaced. Villages disappear in a flash. Families flee in absolute terror. The landscape is literally transformed forever.
Now, I want you to really put yourself in the shoes of the ancient people who might have survived something like this. To an isolated ancient village, a catastrophic regional flood felt exactly like the end of the entire world. When we look at ancient maps and early artistic depictions, the flood isn't just water to them, it's a terrifying erasure of the known boundaries of existence. Remember, these ancient cultures had very limited geographical knowledge. Their whole world was just the valley they lived in, the fields they farmed, the shores they fished. If a regional catastrophe wiped out everything they knew from horizon to horizon, to them, it wasn't just a local disaster. It was a global, world-ending event. And that right there is exactly how a regional reality becomes a global myth.
Section 4. The physical versus the metaphorical.
Having explored the sheer terror of those ancient waters, we've got to jump forward to the modern era's conflict between the physical and the metaphorical. Specifically, the hunt for physical artifacts on rugged mountainsides. You see, the search for Noah's Ark on Mount Ararat in modern-day Turkey has been relentless. For generations, explorers have bravely searched those freezing slopes. Numerous expeditions have claimed to make groundbreaking discoveries, and we've all seen the exciting headlines and those grainy photographs circulating in the media. But crucially, 0 verified remains have ever been accepted by the broader scientific community. No ancient wood, no massive haul. But you know what? This absolute lack of scientific evidence for physical Ark remains actually tells us something profound. It reveals that the true, enduring value of this story isn't buried in the snows of Ararat at all.
Section 5. Memory, Judgment, and Survival.
So, if we aren't meant to find a literal wooden boat, what exactly are we meant to find? Well, we're meant to find ourselves. The flood narrative is not a treasure map, it's a journey through human memory. So the crucial point is that for many scholars and believers, the story functions as a powerful theological narrative, one designed to communicate much deeper truths about judgment, mercy, and new beginnings. Ancient peoples repeatedly experienced devastating floods that left lasting scars on their societies. They took the trauma of those very real survival experiences and wove them into a framework that could teach future generations. It teaches us about the consequences of human corruption, the incredible grace of starting over, and the resilience required to rebuild when absolutely all seems lost. The story survives because its meaning completely transcends mere physical history.
Which leaves us with this final, lingering thought. What happens when humanity faces catastrophe, and how do stories help us remember the past? Ultimately, the search for Noah's flood is really about understanding how our ancestors made sense of extraordinary, devastating events, and how they survived to pass that wisdom down to us. Was it a literal event, a regional catastrophe, or a powerful symbolic story carrying a much deeper moral message? Think about that as you reflect on what we've learned today. I'd love to know your thoughts, so drop them in the comments. And if you enjoy exploring the intersection of faith, history, science, and all the mysteries of our ancient past, be sure to subscribe to Faith Lore, because our history still holds so many secrets just waiting to be uncovered.